Hey everybody, my name is Necroxis, and this is my first video in my new series where I take a look at the story of a game and pick apart what I liked, what I didn't like, and what in my mind didn't make sense. In an age where it seems video games are being pumped out with lesser and lesser regard to story, I wanted to take a stand for all of us lore nerds out there and talk about what my personal favorite aspect of playing games is, and that is immersing myself into the story and universe of another world. In my first episode, I'm taking a look at StarCraft II: Heart of the Swarm and the story of its campaign. As will every episode in this series, this video will contain heavy spoilers for Heart of the Swarm, and if you have yet to play the game, feel free to turn off this video and go experience the story firsthand. As I am still working out how I want to properly format such a story-based review series, I will format the video as follows. First, I will address the storyline as a whole while it progresses. While I don't plan to cover every single plot point remotely possible in the story, I will end up reviewing most of the story itself. Afterward, I will look into each specific character and their background within the context of the story in the game. For example, in the video about StarCraft, when I examine Sarah Kerrigan, it will be within the context of the Heart of the Swarm game and its immediate impact on the story, and not a complete overview of the character in the StarCraft universe as a whole. And finally, I will address the points that I liked, that I disliked, and any irregularities between the two. So, let's get to it then. The story. The game begins with the scene of an immense amount of Zerg invading a Terran world. It appears to be Korhal, the Terran Dominion homeworld. While the Terrans put up an admirable defense, it is clear that the Zerg easily outnumber them, and soon their forces begin to fall. Amidst the chaos, Kerrigan descends from her Leviathan and onto the wrecked land. As she surveys the land, Kerrigan apparently snaps awake from this dream as she is in a laboratory. More importantly, she is not the infested Queen of Blades, but Kerrigan, the kinda sorta human. Heart of the Swarm's story takes place almost immediately after the Wings of Liberty campaign. The only thing that one would need to know going into Heart of the Swarm from the previous campaign is that Jim Raynor had successfully cleansed the vast majority of Zerg influence from Kerrigan's system, reverting her to a mostly human form. There does remain some Zerg mutagen within her system, however, as is demonstrated by her Zerg quote-unquote dreadlocks. But her personality has returned to what it mostly was before she was infested. For those more curious about the few days between Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm's campaigns, a novel called Flashpoint by Christy Golden was written demonstrating what occurred. The short version of it is actually given to you as the beginning scene loads. With the disappearance of the Queen of Blades, the Zerg swarm had been shattered. Jim Raynor's rebel forces have smuggled Sarah Kerrigan off of Char, leaving the planet to General Warfield of the Dominion. Meanwhile, the powerful Xel'Naga artifact had disappeared. In a hidden base in the Umajan Protectorate, Raynor and Prince Valerian have begun conducting tests to ensure Kerrigan's return to humanity is complete, but they are running out of time, because as throughout the sector, Emperor Menk's forces carry out a relentless hunt for the Dominion's most hated enemy, Sarah Kerrigan. Moments before the last test, as stressed by Raynor to Valerian, Jim and Kerrigan share a moment in which the former wishes for nothing more than the two of them to flee and live together in hiding, while the latter is bent on hunting down Arcturus Mensk, leader of the Terran Dominion, and killing him for his numerous crimes against her, most specifically leaving her on the planet Tarsonis, causing her infestation in the first place. Kerrigan stresses that the two of them cannot be together until her quest for vengeance is complete, while Raynor tells her that he moved heaven and earth just to bring her back, and that he wouldn't give up on her, so she shouldn't give up on them. During the test, Kerrigan stresses to Valerian that she cannot recall any memories from her time as Queen of Blades, as the Crown Prince pushes how far she can still control the Zerg. He has Kerrigan take control of a drone and begin building up a small Zerg hatchery cluster within the facility, stopping her after she had commanded the hatchery to produce several other drones and an overlord. Now annoyed with how Valerian treated her more as a prisoner than a willing test subject, Kerrigan creates many Zerglings of her own volition and against the wishes of Valerian. She begins to destroy the test lab, and Kerrigan ends up destroying most of the testing area. However, no casualties occur due to her direct influence. Kerrigan tells Valerian that he cannot plan contingencies for the Zerg and reminds him how dangerous they actually are. Following the test, Raynor and Kerrigan agree to leave the facility, but as fate would have it, the facility soon finds itself under attack from Mengsk's forces, led by the ghost operative Nova. Rushing to her chambers, Raynor catches the aftermath of Kerrigan murdering all of her would-be assassins, and she reluctantly tells Jim that this will never stop until Mengsk is dead. After what is probably the first display of their actual affection in the history of the 4 current StarCraft games, Raynor and Kerrigan proceed to escape the facility and flee to Raynor's ship, the Hyperion. Moments before reaching Raynor's shuttle, a large Dominion Viking destroys a bridge, which causes Raynor and Kerrigan to split up, with Raynor being unable to reach Kerrigan and the shuttle. Promising he'll find a way to the appropriate rendezvous point, and being promised by Valerian that he'll send a team to pick up Jim, Kerrigan destroys the Viking and flees to the Hyperion on Raynor's shuttle. Raynor, meanwhile, is unable to find an appropriate escape route and soon finds himself face to face with Nova herself. We're left with nothing more than Raynor telling her to take her shot and a gunshot sound, leaving his current fate unknown. On the Hyperion, Kerrigan becomes enraged after Valerian tells her that his team was unable to rescue Jim. It is also at this point that the Dominion forces begin to beset the battlecruiser. Taking Jim's shuttle and telling Matt Horner, who is Raynor's second in command, and Valerian that in no uncertain terms that they are not allies, Kerrigan proceeds to the rendezvous planet to wait for Jim. Arriving on the surface, Kerrigan discovers a large Dominion base guarding a Draken cannon, which was ordered to destroy any and all ships warping to the planet's location. Realizing she had no choice, Kerrigan travels to a nearby hive cluster and joins forces with a broodmother named Naktul, who is rejoiced at her queen's return. Despite vehemently denying that she was the broodmother's Queen of Blades and having returned to them, she uses the Zerg to destroy the Dominion base and the cannon. Instinctively ordering her Zerg to kill all the remaining Terrans, Kerrigan becomes shaken and returns to her shuttle, hoping that Jim returns. She confesses that there is still something dark within her, and that she needs him with her. Unfortunately, at the same time, a news report begins to play that states Jim has been taken prisoner by the Dominion, interrogated, and summarily executed. Realizing that she has nothing left in the world but her hatred for Mengsk and her undying vengeance, Kerrigan resigns herself to reforming the Swarm to take to Korhal and kill the Emperor. Kerrigan takes her ship into Zerg space and docks at an enormous Zerg spacefaring creature called the Leviathan. Here she meets several servants that she, as the Queen of Blades, had left behind after her cleansing by the Xel'Naga artifact. The being Ija once served as the entity in which the Queen of Blades kept all of her plans and memories, and Abathur, a sort of Zerg biologist who constantly seeks to change and modify Zerg DNA to create an ever-perfecting swarm. With Ija and Abathur's help, Kerrigan takes the swarm to the icy moon of Kaldir, where she faces off against a group of Protoss researchers. Destroying the Protoss and bolstering her forces, Kerrigan is then met on the Leviathan by Zeratul. After a small confrontation, Zeratul tells Kerrigan about the world of Xeris, from which the Zerg were originally born, and where the Dark One altered them. Zeratul told Kerrigan that if she sought to survive the end of the world that she once foresaw as the Queen of Blades, she must travel there and learn of the primal Zerg. However, before doing so, Kerrigan needed to bolster her forces further, so she then returned to the former Zerg homeworld of Char to reclaim what Zerg were left there following her cleansing by Raynor and the artifact. On the fiery planet, Kerrigan found herself at odds with not only General Warfield and his Terrans, but a fraction of Zerg under the control of a renegade broodmother named Zagara. After Kerrigan's control of the Zerg overpowered Zagara's forces, Kerrigan allowed Zagara and her Zerg to rejoin the swarm, and she summarily regains control over the Zerg on Char. Using her bolstered forces, Kerrigan succeeds in destroying the Terran force on the Zerg homeworld, eventually invading Warfield's base and killing the general himself. Before his death, however, he asks that she allow the fleeing Terrans to escape, asking her what Jim would think of what she's becoming. As he dies, Kerrigan recalls the Zerg back to the Leviathan, leaving Char and allowing the Terrans to escape. Traveling to Xeris now with the majority of the Zerg under her control, Kerrigan encounters the Ancient One, a Zerg who witnessed the birth of the Overmind. At its instruction, Kerrigan travels to the first spawning pool, instructing Zagara to defend her as she willingly undergoes a transformation back into a human-Zerg hybrid, now that she is free from the Dark One's influence due to the Xel'Naga artifact. Emerging a, quote, pure Queen of Blades, Kerrigan kills and absorbs the essences from the pack leaders of Xeris, and eventually from the Ancient One itself. With the death of the Ancient One, a primal Zerg named Dahaka and his brood join Kerrigan and the Swarm. Leaving Xeris, Kerrigan was contacted by a sentient-infested Terran by the name of Alexei Stukov, an old veteran of the United Earth Directorate that had failed to stop the Zerg threat during the Brood Wars. Stukov informed Kerrigan of a hidden laboratory that was breeding Zerg-Protoss hybrids at the behest of the enigmatic Dr. Nerud, who Stukov said was a servant of the Dark One, revealing its name to be Amon. Nerud was seeking to garner psionic power to resurrect Amon, who would then use the Zerg to destroy the universe. Kerrigan and Stukov ultimately dismantle and destroy Nerud's hybrid production laboratory, and Kerrigan ultimately ends up facing off against Nerud himself. While they fight, Nerud tells Kerrigan that it is too late, and he has already succeeded in resurrecting Amon, with Kerrigan realizing that it was in part due to the psionic power drained from her by the Xel'Naga artifact, which was originally suggested by Nerud to Raynor and Valerian as a way to save Kerrigan. Despite Kerrigan claiming Nerud was the strongest psionic she had ever faced, the newly reinfested and empowered Queen of Blades eventually kills Nerud himself. Returning to the Leviathan, Isha informs Kerrigan that Mengska's forces were sending thousands of strange devices into Zerg hive clusters, wondering what they were. Kerrigan immediately recognizes the devices as a two-way communicator, and Mengsk contacts Kerrigan, telling her that Jim was alive, and was being held in a Dominion prison. He told her that as long as her swarm left Korhal and his Dominion alone, Jim would live. Naturally, Kerrigan's first response is to mobilize the Zerg in an effort to rescue Jim and then attack Korhal. Contacting back up with Matt Horner and Valerian, the two form an alliance and contracted the mercenary Mira Han, wanting to use the skills of the Colonel Orlin that she kept on ice to break a decryption and ascertain the prison's location. Discovering Jim was held on a constantly moving prison ship, Kerrigan attacks the prison alone and tracks Jim down. Upon seeing the newly infested Kerrigan, Jim is disgusted with her, asking her why she would reinfest herself and what about Phoenix and the millions of others she killed as the Queen of Blades. Kerrigan responds by saying she had no choice and asks Jim to still believe in her, giving him the choice to kill her, as he once said he was going to, or not. Choosing to spare her life, Kerrigan professes her love to Jim, who responds by saying the two of them are finished. With Jim recovering in the Hyperion's medical bay, Kerrigan takes the Swarm, which has now engulfed all of the remaining renegade broods at this point, and attacks Korhal. Before attacking, Kerrigan tells Zagara, who at this point has been modified by Abathur several times to make her a better leader, that if she should fail, Zagara will lead the Swarm and must pull back from Korhal and prepare for Amon's coming. Pushing through the planet's defenses, Kerrigan destroys the Dominion forces, as well as their secret weapon, a side disruptor with the help of the primal Zerg Dahaka. During the final push against Mengsk's palace, Kerrigan is reinforced by Raynor's raiders, who have come to Kerrigan's rescue after Jim witnessed her agreeing to Valerian's requests that she land on the outskirts of the city and then waits for Valerian to evacuate the civilians. Eventually, Kerrigan reaches Mengsk's private chambers, where the Emperor awaits her. Telling her that he would never allow an animal such as herself so close to him without an insurance policy, Mengsk reveals that he has had the Xel'Naga artifact in his chambers, and begins using it to paralyze and kill Kerrigan. Before he is able to finish the job, Jim arrives and attacks Mengsk, destroying the device he used to activate the artifact. As Kerrigan impales him with her spiked wings, Mengsk tells Kerrigan that he has made her into a monster. Kerrigan disagrees, saying that he has made them all into monsters. She then imbues massive amounts of psionic energies into his head, killing him. With Mengsk dead, Kerrigan thanks Jim for everything he has done for her, with him responding that it was always his pleasure. Taking the swarm, Kerrigan leaves Korhal to its new emperor, Valerian, and takes it to prepare for the final fight against Amon. The characters. Now, the first obvious character we'll take a look at is the Queen of Blades herself, Sarah Kerrigan. Kerrigan starts out the game as the pseudo-human with very little Zerg mutagen left in her system. What is established in the first seconds of the game is that Kerrigan cannot supposedly remember anything from her days as the original Queen of Blades. This fact is brought up many times throughout the campaign, although there are several examples of this not exactly being true, which is something I will bring up in the next segment. In the beginning of the story, the almost human Kerrigan retains few, if any, of her personality quirks from her original Queen of Blades days, like murdering everybody and constantly betraying her allies. For those of you who played the original StarCraft, and if you haven't, what is wrong with you? You might remember how Kerrigan was as a ghost. This is essentially how the de-infested Kerrigan's outlook on the world is, if a tad less optimistic. Although the time we see Kerrigan with Jim is overall a very short part of the campaign as a whole, we finally see some character development for her outside of the constant rage that was the Queen of Blades. Jim and Kerrigan seem happy together, if not slightly awkward. Their relationship is a long-established canonical event, but the only real interaction we see of this romance is in the extended universe. In the RTS games, we're simply told that they were once romantically involved, so it's a nice change of pace to finally see them in some actual romantic capacity. Kerrigan is constantly reflecting on what she has done as the Queen of Blades, while Jim is constantly worried about what might be coming their way from Mengsk. Thus, neither of them concentrates on the here and now, and it makes their relationship slightly awkward. It is not until Mengsk actually attacks the laboratory that we see the two of them ease back into a working relationship, and then that is cut short by Jim's inevitable kidnapping. The rub here is that the reason the two of them are no longer awkward with one another is because they are too busy dealing with the problem from their past enemy Mengsk to focus on the right now. Another aspect of the mostly human Kerrigan's personality that is stressed is the fact that she finds the idea of using the Zerg absolutely abhorrent, although that quickly begins to change as she realizes the Zerg will work well to fulfill her revenge. This can be explained away as her reaching the breaking point of no return after learning of Jim's supposed execution. I'm going to make a small semantic change at this point. While the original Queen of Blades was called, quote, an infested Terran, infestation itself implies a negative or involuntary change. Seeing as neither of these things ring true with Kerrigan after she willingly enters the spawning pool on Xeris, I believe a more apt term to describe Kerrigan's new form would be a primal Zerg. From the time between Kerrigan's Umosian escape and her willing transformation into a primal Zerg, we can see that the rage that she perhaps justifiably feels towards her enemies is tempered. When she instructs Nek'Tul's Zerg to kill all the humans on Umoja, she is utterly disgusted with the thought, so much so that she abandons the entire planet and her allies. She displays reluctance to kill those that she does not have to multiple times as well. She laments the Protoss Lasara's fate when she purposefully infects her to stop the Protoss from contacting their Golden Armada, and then she also agrees to General Warfield's request to spare his men that pose no threat to her. Perhaps the biggest point of importance in the development of Kerrigan is when she willingly enters the primal spawning pool herself on Xeris. Unlike the first time, this new Kerrigan does not undergo a personality change outside of herself feeling more connected to the Zerg. Whereas the Queen of Blades went from a perhaps mentally damaged human to a sociopathic monster, Kerrigan still retains most, if not all, of her personality from her mostly human form. We can confirm this when we see her willingly make her attack on Korhal more difficult because Valerian asks her to allow him to evacuate the civilians. She also agrees to avoid civilian targets in the final battle. Another drastic change is that Kerrigan even begins to trust her underlings. Before the final battle on Korhal, she instructs Zagara to remain behind, in the event that should she die, Zagara will need to withdraw the swarm from Korhal to prepare for the final battle against Amon. This is a radically different point of view from the original Queen of Blades. where she would often sacrifice whatever she possibly could to achieve her immediate goal. As Kerrigan tells Zagara several times, the power of vision or foresight is an incredibly valuable skill, and it seems that the primal Zerg imbuing process on Xeris has not robbed Kerrigan of this trait. Finally, we see the new Zerg primal Kerrigan continue the philosophy of the mostly human Kerrigan when she bars Abathur from experimenting on Terrans. Seeing as how Zerg DNA cannot be spliced with Protoss in a way known to those not following Amon, this means that Kerrigan has commanded Abathur to only iterate on Zerg DNA itself. In an effort to maintain neutrality, however, it should be noted that Kerrigan still does use aberrations, which are formed primarily through Terran corpses. During this time, she also uses many infested Dominion troops while assaulting Dr. Narud's facility. Although this does hold consistent with Kerrigan's actions towards the Dominion versus those of normal citizens. These points raise a few questions about the future of the StarCraft II storyline overall. Was human Kerrigan's drastic personality shift into a sociopathic mass murderer in the original StarCraft because she was forcibly changed instead of willingly? Was it because the Overmind wanted her to be bloodthirsty? Or could it possibly be because Amon's changes to the primal Zerg increased any and all future beings that would have Zerg DNA to be overly aggressive? It is not clear at this point, but the suggestion is made by the Ancient One that this pure Kerrigan is now something far greater than even the original Queen of Blades. A final subtle nod to this is in the cutscene in which Matt Horner and Valerian are informed that a psionic presence is incoming, and it was so powerful as to be unclassifiable. This is different from the Wings of Liberty campaign, where she is classified as a Class 7 psionic. It was hinted in the Wings of Liberty campaign that the way in which Kerrigan is instrumental in stopping Amon is that she will change the Zerg to prevent Amon from controlling them. Heart of the Swarm compounds on this fact by changing Kerrigan herself, both physically and mentally. She is now a Zerg, but free from Amon's influence. We have seen in previous media that the original Queen of Blades used to experiment on changing Zerg DNA. Perhaps this is how she will achieve that goal now. Abathur tells Kerrigan that the Zerg were not meant to operate without a hive mind leader, and that free will is not a trait that is desirable because it can lead to betrayals from highly evolved Zerg. Kerrigan states that she still wishes for her broodmothers to have such free will, because not only will it make them more dangerous, but also be able to understand how to more efficiently combat an enemy should she be unavailable. In a way, Kerrigan plans out a path where if the leader is killed or indisposed, the Swarm would still be able to operate without fracturing, which is something we see happen several times throughout the Zerg's history. This also could be hinting at a future death for Kerrigan, or her being indisposed for a large portion of the final campaign, Legacy of the Void. During the Heart of the Swarm story, Ija serves a purpose similar to Matt Horner in that she serves as the character to reveal parts of Kerrigan's backstory, most specifically her time as Queen of Blades. Because she is physically attached to Leviathan, she does not appear on the battlefield, although she also does serve a role additionally similar to what the Adjutant did in Wings of Liberty. Being as she primarily serves as a recollection factory, which is something she compares herself to willingly, her character does not develop much, if at all. Ija has a tendency of speaking bluntly about issues that are irrelevant to the Zerg, such as Kerrigan caring about the unnecessary deaths of Terrans, or the morality issues that she faces throughout the campaign. This usually results in Kerrigan becoming annoyed at Ija and commanding her to be quiet. Unlike the other Zerg allies in the campaign, Kerrigan does not have to prove herself to Ija in order to understand that she was their former leader. Kerrigan accomplishes this using a type of psionic suggestion to make Ija admit that she is her queen. Brian Kindregan, the lead writer of StarCraft II's story, describes Ija thusly. Ija exemplifies a midpoint for Kerrigan, standing between Kerrigan's cold rationality and the feral nature of the Swarm. She harkens back to the ideology of the Overmind, but is still a rational individual. End quote. Ultimately, unlike Zagara, Kerrigan's attempts to explain the more human side of her fail to resonate with Ija. Whereas Kerrigan displays inner pain at Raynor's supposed death, Ija simply believes that Kerrigan has been physically wounded. She also cannot understand the various feelings of guilt, anger, and vengeance that Kerrigan feels throughout the campaign, and on more than one occasion has devalued helping Kerrigan, so much so to suggest that she shouldn't feel upset because she has achieved purity of essence, which of course is what the Xel'Naga have programmed them to strive for anyway. Abathur can be described as essentially the Zerg version of Mass Effect's Mordin Solus. Interestingly enough, he is also voiced by Steve Blum, the voice of the actor who actually plays Grunt in the Mass Effect universe, as well as Spike from Cowboy Bebop. He is unapologetically cold, calculating, and scientific. His only stated goal is to continually modify the Zerg and search for perfection, although he openly admits that perfection cannot be possible. However, throughout the campaign, Abathur expresses the suggestion that perfection can be defined as simply being capable to act in any environment. The Zerg were originally programmed to search for purity of essence, meaning that they could reach a state where they no longer needed to evolve. And while the Xel'Naga are gone, the Zerg have retained this idea. In a way, Abathur personifies this idea completely and perfectly. Throughout the campaign, he modifies essentially every Zerg unit you can use in one form or another. He constantly explores worlds to obtain essences of other creatures and fold them into the Zerg DNA strand. One of the themes of the Zerg campaign is adaptability, and that is primarily pushed through Abathur. Throughout the campaign, Kerrigan is instinctively wary and then later on hostile towards Abathur. Abathur's first comment to her is that her Terran flesh is weak and impractical, and he offers to, quote, reshape her into something more fitting. Naturally, Kerrigan's response is less than positive. Later on, Kerrigan admits that she cannot recall why, but looking at Abathur spurs feelings of intense hatred. We later find out this is because Abathur was the one who originally broke the body of the human Kerrigan and reformed it into the Queen of Blades, with him going into oddly specific detail about breaking and reforming her bones. Whereas Abathur initially comes off as cold and rational as Isha, or perhaps even more so, several interactions between him and Kerrigan reveal that he is also prone to being extremely prideful. He appears jealous at Kerrigan's idea of infecting Lysara with the larva to destroy the Protoss mothership, and even seems to become angry at the idea that the primal Zerg would absorb the essence of the current swarm, of which he designed, in order to help their primal evolution. A final bit of character development is revealed that Abathur was a feral beast for the time period between the Queen of Blades' de-infestation and Kerrigan's return. When asked why Naktul or Zagara could not command him, he states that only a very strong psionic being can control him, such as the Overmind or the Queen of Blades. Whereas Isha can be compared to Matt Horner from Wings of Liberty, Abathur's personality is probably compared to Tychus. He comes off unnaturally evil or diabolic, and it seems probable at some point that he would try to betray Kerrigan. Despite the rumor that him or Isha would supposedly have ulterior motives, neither of them actually betray Kerrigan at any point in the story. Zagara is a broodmother who, upon learning of Kerrigan's de-infestation, struck on her own, seeking to establish her brood as the leading force within the Zerg. She settles down in the acid marshes of Char, and ultimately seeks to reunite the fractured swarm under her leadership. Kerrigan's return was met with a hostile response from Zagara, with the broodmother calling her a weak human and unworthy to lead the swarm. This resulted in a rush, with both Kerrigan and Zagara scrambling to collect more Zergling and Baneling eggs to use against the other. Eventually, Kerrigan's control of the Zerg won out over Zagara, and moments before Kerrigan's Zergling tore Zagara to shreds, the broodmother admitted that she was only following Kerrigan's orders to become a strong leader and lead through power. Kerrigan saw a powerful ally in Zagara herself, and allowed her and her brood to rejoin the swarm. Throughout the campaign, Zagara is perhaps the character who undergoes the largest change, even more so than Kerrigan herself. Initially, Zagara is brash, foolish, and reckless. She argues to Kerrigan that her brood alone would be enough to kill Mengsk, and that seeking to unite the rest of the swarm before attacking Korhal is foolish and wasting time. She frequently does not understand a course of action that Kerrigan takes, and cannot seem to understand any tactic other than using her Zerg to swarm an enemy. This, of course, ultimately results in Zagara losing the majority of her brood to General Warfield's powerful battlecruisers in the Bone Trench, where she marches her brood through trenches easily bombarded by the powerful Dominion Gorgon battlecruisers. Kerrigan teaches Zagara the ideals that she believes a leader of the Zerg must have, specifically strategy and foresight. Zagara first dismisses these ideals as unnecessary, but begins to understand once Kerrigan wins several decisive battles against both the Dominion and the Protoss. Several times Kerrigan has Abathur modify Zagara in a way to understand these aspects more easily. Although Zagara expresses him doing this, it is painful. An interesting dynamic between Kerrigan and Zagara begins to develop, with Zagara eventually proclaiming to feel so powerful due to Kerrigan's suggested evolutions that she considers herself to be nearly a match for the Queen. Kerrigan tells Zagara that she is free to make her attack whenever she thinks, but if she does, it will be a final battle where one does not come out alive. Zagara immediately backs down, telling Kerrigan that she still has much to learn. Later on, when Kerrigan is nearly killed by Nerud, Zagara and Isha have an opportunity to overthrow Kerrigan and usurp her place as leader of the swarm. While she is healing, Kerrigan inquires as to why Zagara didn't do this, with the broodmother stating that she still has much to learn. After this interaction, their relationship warms up, becoming almost one of a master and student. Kerrigan tells Zagara that should she fail in her mission to kill Menks, she must take the swarm and withdraw from Korhal to prepare for the final battle with Amon. Several times, Zagara expresses that Kerrigan has become even more powerful than the original Queen of Blades, and even expresses pride that she is her queen, a trait not usually found in the Zerg due to the nature of the hive mind. Speaking from a strictly theory-crafting standpoint, Zagara could be pointed to as the blueprint of how Kerrigan might be able to prevent Amon from controlling the Zerg should he return. It is hinted at several times that the Zerg hive mind is both a benefit, in terms of its ability to swarm and destroy worlds, but also a detriment, due to Amon being able to usurp control from its leader. Abathur strictly denies that giving free will to the Zerg broodmothers is a good idea, but Kerrigan rejects this and commands him to do so on Zagara anyway. It is entirely possible that Kerrigan will transform the Zerg from an actual hive mind into a group where they stick together out of necessity and like-mindedness, similar to the Forsaken in World of Warcraft. But of course, this is just a theory. Dahaka. Dahaka is a primal Zerg that joins Kerrigan on her Leviathan after she kills and absorbs the essence of the Ancient One on Xeris. He is akin more to a simple-minded beast, only wishing to absorb essence from slain enemies. When Kerrigan asks for what purpose he absorbs essence, Dahaka responds with an almost childlike comment about him absorbing essence because if he does not adapt and change, then he will die. In the most basic of ways, Dahaka represents the stark difference between what Amon's interference with the Zerg's evolution has done for its race. Dahaka does not undergo any real significant character development in the story. However, before the final invasion on Korhal, he confesses to Kerrigan that he has enjoyed his time with her swarm, as they have killed many enemies and absorbed much essence. While a short description, I decided to include Dahaka on this list because as I played through the campaign, I would frequently begin to wonder what Dahaka's opinion on what was going on was. And of course I wasn't disappointed that he was always talking about essence. Alexei Stukov was a former officer of the United Earth Directorate, a force from Earth that once sought to control the Zerg by enslaving the second growing Overmind. He was betrayed by Samir Duran after Duran convinced Stukov's leader and friend, Gerard Dugal, that Stukov was a traitor. Ultimately, it was revealed that Duran was working with the Queen of Blades, and Stukov was proclaimed lost in the UEG's war against the Zerg, with no specifics given. In an effort to cover up such a large oversight in face of a victory for the UED in controlling the Overmind, a televised empty coffin was shot into space, supposedly containing the remains of the hero of Earth, Stukov. But in a storyline explored in the extended universe, his body was actually resurrected and infested by a rogue Cerebrit. He was eventually cured by Jim Raynor and an old Protoss Dragoon, but he was subsequently infested again after his body was given to the Mobius Foundation and Dr. Nerud, who at this point was seeking to perfect his Protoss-Zerg hybrid creation process. Escaping at some point, Stukov contacted Kerrigan, wanting her aid in revenge against the lab, while Kerrigan realized that he could not assault Korhal if Menks still had hybrids. Eventually, the two of them do succeed in destroying Nerud's laboratory. But after the destruction of the lab, Stukov becomes more of a passive commentator, although he does participate in the final push against Menks' palace, leading a group of infested Terrans against the Emperor. Stukov can most be comparable to Tosh from Wings of Liberty. They both have colorful pasts, to say the least, and have no problem with taking less than reputable actions to achieve their appropriate goals. Jim plays a relatively small role in the Heart of the Swarm story, despite being the impetus for the entire thing. He is absent from the vast majority of the storyline due to being held prisoner by Mensk. At first, Jim is utterly disgusted with the new Zerg Primal Kerrigan, most likely envisioning her simply as becoming the Queen of Blades once more. Truth be told, the assumption isn't exactly unreasonable, but Kerrigan's immediate reaction to Jim's disgust seems to have made him recognize that the old Queen of Blades and Kerrigan are not the same. Jim again is absent until the final mission when you attack Manx's palace, where he arrives to help Kerrigan, realizing before the attack begins that even though her form has changed, her mental state had not, after he witnesses her agreeing to Valerian's request to spare as many civilians as possible. The Heart of the Swarm finale leaves whatever potential relationship might have existed between Jim and Kerrigan at this point in doubt, as she seemingly leaves to prepare for the final battle against Aemon. Likes, dislikes, and irregularities. Likes. I would have to say my absolute favorite part of the Heart of the Swarm storyline are all of the callbacks to the previous campaigns, games, and stories. Harkening all the way back to the original StarCraft itself, Heart of the Swarm is full to the brim of nostalgia, and that is not a bad thing. We're treated to appearances from everybody between Zeratul, Stukov, Matt Horner, Mira Han, and even Dr. Nerud and Samir Duran. As I mentioned during the story summary, we do finally see the first in-game display of affection between Kerrigan and Jim. And as the sappy bastard that I am, I appreciate that they at least remembered to include the fact that Jim spent the entire last campaign trying to rescue the woman he supposedly loved. Another storyline element that I really appreciated was the focus on the ever-changing nature of the Zerg. Throughout the campaigns of the other games, we're simply told that the Zerg as a race seek to constantly improve themselves, but we don't really see many examples of this actually occurring. We're treated to a few adaptations here in StarCraft and Brood War, such as the original infestation of Kerrigan, but it really isn't until Heart of the Swarm that the aspect of adaptation is actually included as a story element. It really does differentiate itself from the story of Wings of Liberty, living up to Blizzard's charge that Heart of the Swarm is the most in-depth look at the Zerg that has ever been carried out. The main themes of the game focusing around Kerrigan are fury, revenge, and hatred, and the story delivers on all three. Where Kerrigan was once seen simply as a sociopath murdering whoever stood in her way, the primal Kerrigan fights out of a necessity of survival. And while it is true that she fights this way because of the original Queen of Blades, Blizzard does a fantastic job at making Kerrigan and the Zerg relatable as a race, instead of simply as a bunch of alien bugs wanting to destroy the universe. Finally, I wondered how Blizzard would handle the death of Arcturus Mengsk. He has been set up as a villain since the original StarCraft, and I feared whatever fate they would ultimately decide for him wouldn't be as satisfying as it could or should be. I was convinced that Mengsk would have to die at the end of Heart of the Swarm in order to make room for the actual villain of the series, Aemon. And I have to say that although his death might not seem particularly violent, it still felt incredibly rewarding. I had honestly forgotten about the Xel'Naga artifact, assuming Blizzard would have just let the lore object fade away into obscurity after serving as the Deus Ex Machina of the first game. So it was interesting that Mengsk was using it as a final defense against Kerrigan. The fact that Kerrigan herself isn't cleansed of Zerg influence despite being shocked with it 3 times also brings up another interesting storyline fact. It appears that Kerrigan has been warped enough by the primal spawning pool that the Xel'Naga artifact, while still effective, cannot kill her. It brings up an interesting hypothetical on how and if the Zerg will be mutated by Kerrigan as to avoid being controlled by Aemon. I am more intrigued than ever as to how Blizzard will end this story. Dislikes. In what most likely will not be a common occurrence, my major issue with the campaign story is the plethora of inconsistencies that Blizzard seems to have overlooked, which I will be discussing in the last segment. Other than that, another aspect that I disliked was the fact that Tosh did not appear in the campaign in an actual capacity. Despite Blizzard claiming a lot of characters from Wings of Liberty won't make an actual appearance in Heart of the Swarm, essentially everybody does except for Stetman, Dr. Hansen, and Tosh. Even Mira Han, Colonel Orlin, and Rory Swan the Engineer make appearances. Tosh was my absolute favorite character from Wings of Liberty, and I would have liked at least one interaction with him in Heart of the Swarm. I do realize he is shown in the background with Matt Horner and Valerian, but I still would have liked to hear his opinion on what was going on. As for a small annoyance that I disliked, when I was reading about the campaign before release, Blizzard writers made it seem like Abathur was some flawed, malevolent figure that would have some kind of impactful event on the storyline. And during the campaign, Kerrigan's anger toward him seems to confirm this. However, all we're treated to is the fact that he was really the one who crafted the Queen of Blades form, and after this reveal, there really is no follow-up storyline. While arguably important, it really didn't add anything, if much, to the overall story. I also would have preferred if they would have at least mentioned the fact that Ija was once a human, that the original Queen of Blades morphed into what she is now. Finally, while I supremely enjoyed Menx's death, I felt as if Dr. Nerud or Duran or whatever you want to call him, I felt like his death was very lacking. Until we were introduced to the mysterious Dark Voice 2/3 of the way through the Wings of Liberty storyline, Samir Duran was the representation of all the villainous force in the StarCraft universe that existed outside of the stereotypical all three races hate each other trichotomy that kept iterating itself in the StarCraft story. The actual death scene and the fight itself were actually really well animated, and I did enjoy the fact that Nerud transforms into both Jim and the human form of Kerrigan to demonstrate everything that she lost. But still, after his death, I was left with a, wow, is that really it? Duran's now dead? Sort of feeling. I'm not exactly sure in what way they could have killed Duran that I would have enjoyed, and perhaps I am taking an untenable position about his death, but I simply didn't find satisfaction in his final stand in the story. Irregularities. As I mentioned previously, the biggest issue I had with the Heart of the Swarm campaign was the fact that Blizzard seemed to not double-check their story for consistency. They didn't seem to care or want to flesh out the stories of their secondary characters, or maybe I'm just missing parts of the story. Frankly, it could be any or all of those reasons. But as somebody who has played through the campaign 3 times now, I couldn't ignore the fact that several story threads are left hanging, or just don't make sense. The first example is the fact that Kerrigan claims she cannot recall her time as the Queen of Blades, but then throughout the campaign she proceeds to constantly recall things about her time as the Queen of Blades. Whether or not she initially lied to Valyrian still remains to be seen, but time and time again, Kerrigan seems to either remember or not remember things based on whether Blizzard needs to teach the player a tutorial or provide appropriate backstory. But I'll just give you the biggest example I could find and leave it at that, because I don't want to make this segment last 10 minutes long. Kerrigan, when speaking to Isha about Stukov, tells her that she does recall the UED in the Earth's attack on the Overmind. This is extremely contradictory because during the Brood Wars is arguably when Kerrigan was becoming as powerful as she is in Wings of Liberty. This then leads into the fact that the Samir Duran and the Dr. Nerud connection is not explored. At all. Anywhere. Zero, zip, nada, nothing. Blizzard has hinted at the fact that we've met Duran in StarCraft 2's campaign already, so it was pretty apparently clear to the lore fans that they were referring to Dr. Emil Nerud. So the fact that Blizzard does not address this connection whatsoever was intensely annoying. At most, we're told that Dr. Nerud is a shape-shifting psionic that serves Amon. Kerrigan apparently cannot recall the fact that she worked with Samir Duran for the large portion of the Brood War storyline. Despite the fact that she does remember the UED, she remembers the Overmind being enslaved, and a bunch of other things that she apparently does remember. Stukov also apparently cannot recall anything about Samir Duran, despite the fact that he was the one betrayed by him and ultimately killed by him. Even if we allow for the excuse of Kerrigan's selective memory loss to explain away while she is ignorant, the fact that Stukov himself cannot recall this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. He was the one that explains most of the backstory of Dr. Nerud, so you would figure that somebody in that situation would make the connection. As one final point, I feel like I have to address this somewhere. While I certainly don't mind Trisha Helfer as Kerrigan's voice actress, even if I did enjoy Glynis Campbell a little bit more, I feel like in Heart of the Swarm she constantly misemphasizes a lot of sentences, making them come off as awkward instead of angry or sad or emotional, or whatever the emotion was supposed to be conveyed. It really took away from Kerrigan's character for me personally. Even if the method of how she delivers her lines really matters little in terms of character development, it was just a personal gripe that I found intensely obnoxious. But, like I said, this is a segment of just my opinion on the storyline, and you are more than free to disagree. In fact, I encourage it. If you have an alternate opinion on some theory or the story of Heart of the Swarm, or if you think I omitted something or got something wrong, I would love to hear it. Leave it in the comments below and I will most definitely read them. Finale. To finish off my video, I figured I would simply give a short explanation of what I thought of the storyline as a whole. While a bit hackneyed and cliched, overall I still really enjoyed the storyline, as I am kind of a sucker for a sappy story. And despite the fact that Blizzard essentially gave away the major plot points with their finer trailer before the release, I feel as if Heart of the Swarm is a worthy entry into the StarCraft II storyline. I want to personally thank everybody who has watched this entire video. This is my first attempt at something other than simply recording myself playing a game with commentary over it. And thus, it took quite a bit of time. But if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, I would love to hear them. Just leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you shared it, commented, and subscribed, or if you had any questions or want to suggest something, leave those in the comments as well. Hopefully my next story dissection will be the BioShock Infinite game, which is coming out in less than 2 weeks. I'm super excited for it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see some of my other stuff, feel free to check out my lore series about World of Warcraft called Necroxis Lores, or my BioShock playthrough. Thanks again guys, and I'll see you for the next story dissection. Farewell.